Coming next, the closing news conference of the European Community Summit. Heads of state met on Friday and Saturday in Edinburgh, Scotland, to discuss issues facing the EC. Presiding over the summit was its rotating president, Prime Minister John Major of Great Britain. One of the key issues addressed was the Maastricht Treaty. Last year, EC leaders signed an agreement in the Dutch town of Maastricht, which was to forge closer political and economic ties, including the establishment of a single currency among the member countries. Under community rules, each country has to ratify the treaty, but in Denmark, the agreement was defeated in a referendum held in June. Now, to ease some of the Danes' concerns, who will hold another referendum next year, EC leaders have worked out a compromise at the Edinburgh summit. Denmark will be exempt from provisions of the treaty dealing with citizenship, defense, a common currency, and police and judicial cooperation. On other issues discussed in Edinburgh, officials agreed to begin membership negotiations next year with Austria, Sweden, and Finland. Members also decided to provide economic aid to the community's 4 poorer nations, Spain, Ireland, Greece, and Portugal. The European Parliament will be expanded by 49 seats to take into account German unification. And now, the closing news conference of the European Community Summit.
Some water. Yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this presidency briefing at the end of the Edinburgh European Council. We will start off with the Prime Minister giving an introduction to explain what has been achieved during this Council. And during the question and answer session, I would ask you all please to wait for the people that have the roving microphones, and before asking your questions, please state your name and organization. Thank you. Prime Minister.
Gus, thank you very much indeed. May I begin by expressing my thanks to the people of Edinburgh for the very warm welcome we've had and the excellent way in which we've been cared for throughout the last 2 days. Let me say, as President of the European Council, I'm very pleased to announce this evening a real breakthrough on a number of fronts at the Edinburgh meeting. The decisions that we've taken collectively today will enable the community to go forward as 12. They open the way for new states to join. The community has made important progress on subsidiarity, and it has agreed a growth initiative that gives new confidence for investment and for jobs in every country throughout the European community. I believe we faced at this summit more difficult interlocking problems than at any recent European Council. But I believe we can claim that today we have solved the Rubik's Cube that was laid before us. Let me turn firstly to Denmark. We have reached a legally binding decision which will enable Poul Schlüter to go back to the Danish people and recommend a yes vote in a second referendum in the spring. Our decisions today deal with the genuine concerns expressed in Denmark, but it does not require a change in the treaty, and it does not require a fresh round of ratification in member states. Second, the economy. The growth initiative we've agreed today will boost confidence and promote economic recovery right the way across the community. It includes a new European investment fund and a special loan facility to be provided by the European Investment Bank. In total, these will be able to support new investment of up to £24 billion. We are completing the single market on time, a magnificent achievement which provides Europe's businessmen with new opportunities and Europe's consumers with a new freedom of choice. Well, I think if you wait, you may hear something to your interest, and I'm sure others would rather hear from you later.
Nobody talks about the consequences of unifying the third world. All you can think of is free trade and economic growth.
Well, the summit was easier natured than that. Let me go back to the economy, and I will touch in essence upon some of the points that were implicitly raised then in a few moments. I was saying that we have completed the single market on time, providing Europe's businessmen with new opportunities and Europe's consumers with a new freedom of choice. And we'll continue to work for a GATT settlement which could add around £200 billion to world income. Third, I want to say something about the budget. We have agreed on the financing of the community to the end of this century. At a time of high budget deficits throughout Europe, we will keep the present limit on community spending for a further 2 years. For 2 years, there will be no increase. Thereafter, there will be a gradual and a limited increase. This will cover the community's own necessary expenditure, for example, on research and development, and also support development and meet real need in countries as different as Russia and Somalia. We have provided, of course, substantial help to those countries. It will also help the least developed regions of the community, especially in building up their infrastructure. I have to say to you, this was a very hard-fought negotiation. While some pressed for much bigger increases, others wanted less. And there was a strong feeling that this was as much as the community's taxpayers could afford at a time when all member governments are having to restrain their spending at home. The UK abatement has been the subject of discussion over recent weeks. It did come under some attack during that period. I made it clear that the rebate was not a favour to Britain, but a recognition that we would otherwise pay an unfairly large amount to the community. Our community partners have accepted this. The rebate is now renewed unchanged until the turn of the century and cannot, of course, be changed without Britain's agreement. Fourthly, I'd like to turn to enlargement. Here we've made a very substantial step forward. Up until now, the formal position has been that enlargement negotiations could not begin until the Maastricht Treaty had been ratified. But all of us have agreed today that it is in the community's interests to get on with formal negotiation as soon as possible. There could, I believe, be no better sign of an outward-looking community, and I believe this will be very welcome news indeed to Sweden, to Austria, to Finland, and of course to Norway. The Commission have also put forward an important paper on the relationship between the community and the countries of Eastern Europe. This paper, which is formally welcomed in the conclusions, calls for early trade liberalisation and full membership of the community for the countries concerned as soon as they are ready for it. Fifthly, subsidiarity. Under the terms of the Maastricht Treaty, we introduced a new and legally binding principle of subsidiarity. At Birmingham, we agreed that the Council must come up with a clear implementation package at Edinburgh. And we asked the Commission to produce examples of existing legislation which might be changed or withdrawn, or proposed legislation which should be scrapped. At Edinburgh, we have met all these targets, and I would particularly like to offer my congratulations to the President of the Commission for the work that he has done to ensure that those targets have been met. On subsidiarity,
who is the next?
Go to Great Britain. The easiest plan to tell that belongs to the new highway strategy. Concrete Europe.
I'd just like to check there are some journalists here. Is that all right?
Where's the next? Here.
If you will be patient, we will continue in a moment. And I would just say before we continue that as far as I recall, it was the United Kingdom that was the first country anywhere in the world to introduce a full-scale environment department over 20 years ago, and we still, I believe, lead the way in many of our environmental practices. Let me return back to subsidiarity. Let me tell you what we have agreed today. On subsidiarity, we've agreed guidelines based on the principle that the... Oh, my goodness.
This is a joke.
And in your country, more than 60% of these decisions you're making are too important to not consult the people. It's going to be affected of your decisions. But you also have to inform about all consequences.
We'll have the other demonstrations now.
Yes.
Against the Maastricht Treaty.
Could I have a special appeal? Could we please have the next demonstration now? Really is quite like being in the House of Commons. Right. Let me return to subsidiarity. We've agreed today guidelines based on the principle that the community can only act where given the power to do so. National powers are the rule and the community is the exception. And we've also agreed new procedures for the Commission and the Council. And we now have a list of examples to show that this principle is having real effect. Each country produces its own examples of excessive interference. In Britain, today's subsidiarity agreement is good news, for example, for groups threatened by draft directives, groups as diverse as the Royal National Lifeboat Institute and the St. John's Ambulance Brigade. And again, I express my thanks to President Delors for his work on this matter. Sixthly, openness. In just 7 weeks since the Birmingham summit, we have put together and agreed a package of measures to open up the community to scrutiny by the people of Europe. We will open up debates on issues of general community interest. We will ensure community legislation is simpler and clearer. And we will publish voting records whenever formal votes are taken in the Council. We have also agreed 2 important issues that have been outstanding for a number of presidencies. On sites of institutions, we have signed a decision this evening confirming the sites and working arrangements for all the main community institutions, the Parliament, the Council, the Commission, and some others. That is the heart of the problem that has blocked decisions on sites of institutions for years. We've agreed that decisions on new institutions, the European Central Bank and others, will be pursued by the next presidency. On members of the European Parliament, we've agreed to increase the number of German members of the European Parliament to reflect unification and at the same time to change the numbers for other countries, particularly bearing enlargement in mind. This will result in a European Parliament of manageable size after enlargement. Britain received 6 more members of the European Parliament, as did France and Italy. Let me now turn to foreign policy issues. We've reached agreement on international aid for the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The issue of recognition remains highly sensitive. But today we've agreed that we won't let it stand in the way of meeting the pressing need for large-scale international assistance. That in itself, we believe, will help provide stability. We have also unreservedly backed the United Nations plan to put a battalion of soldiers to monitor the peace there. We would like to do the same in Kosovo. In Bosnia, we've called, among other things, for the Security Council to examine systematically the operation of the no-fly zone. Let me try and sum up. It has been hard pounding during this European Council. But as we come to the end of this Council and near to the end of our presidency, I believe that for both Britain and for the community, much has been achieved. The single market, the largest free market in the world, is opening for business. There has been a long-awaited breakthrough in the GATT talks, whose completion could give a $200 billion boost to world income. We have today agreed a growth initiative which could raise investment by up to £24 billion, creating jobs and boosting confidence throughout the European community. We have provided the way forward for Denmark to ratify the Maastricht Treaty. The community's finances have been put on a sound, a fair, and an affordable basis for the rest of this century. And the community has today opened the door to a wider Europe in the future. I believe that as a result of these decisions, the Edinburgh European Council will be remembered as the summit that put the community back together and put us all back on the track for recovery. Now I will invite President Delors to say a few words, and then we will attempt to take any questions you may have.
Mesdames, Messieurs, je voudrais simplement ajouter que, contrairement à l'ambiance qui régnait ces dernières semaines, et contrairement à beaucoup de détracteurs, la communauté a montré pendant ces 2 jours sa bonne santé, sa capacité de réagir même dans des situations extrêmement difficiles que la présidence britannique a réussi à dénouer. Le Premier ministre, président du Conseil européen, vous a indiqué les principaux points. Je n'ajouterai que 3 remarques. Premièrement, en ce qui concerne les politiques communes et les moyens financiers, le Conseil européen s'est mis d'accord sur 85% des propositions faites par la Commission. Ce qui, comme l'a dit le président du Conseil européen, nous permet d'envisager avec optimisme le déroulement de la communauté pendant les années à venir. Deuxièmement, la question des sièges a été réglée pour les sièges principaux. Ce n'était pas facile. Et cela a montré qu'il y avait encore dans la communauté un esprit de famille pour réussir à clarifier une situation qui était obscure, lourde de contentieux depuis des années. Et enfin, troisièmement, je voudrais rendre hommage au Parlement européen, puisque pour la première fois, à ma connaissance, dans l'histoire de la communauté, le Conseil européen s'est saisi d'une proposition du Parlement. Je veux parler du rapport de Gourt sur la composition du Parlement européen et en a fait la base de sa proposition qui a été entièrement acceptée. Et ceci montre aussi la bonne santé de la 3e institution, le Parlement européen. Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, those of you that waited. John Sargent.
John Sargent, BBC. Could I ask the Prime Minister, following the agreement with Denmark, could you confirm that the 3rd reading debate in the Commons on the bill to ratify the Maastricht Treaty will now be held after the 2nd Danish referendum? And is there a chance that Britain could ratify by July the 1st, which is the date suggested by the European Parliament?
Well, the Danish referendum is now likely to be at the end of April, beginning of May. We can't be precisely sure when it is, and we will not be ready for 3rd reading in the Commons until after that date, so it will follow very hard on its heels. We will then ratify as speedily as possible, but it needs to go through, of course, both the Commons and the Lords, so I can't be precise as to timing.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Daily Telegraph. On the Danish decision, can you explain in exactly what way these opt-outs for Denmark change that country's legal obligations under the Treaty of Maastricht? And if they don't change Denmark's legal obligations, how can Denmark go ahead and have a second referendum on an unchanged treaty?
I think it clarifies and interprets a great deal that was of concern to Denmark, and I think you'll need to look very carefully at what we've done. It's a mixture of a unilateral declaration by Denmark, a declaration by the community as a whole, conclusions by the community as a whole, and a decision that has been reached on several key issues of importance to Denmark. The key points are this: it is a legally binding decision covering Danish concerns. The Danes won't have to join the single currency or the Western European Union, the defence grouping, and that deals with their defence point. It will enable the Danish Prime Minister to go for a second referendum, and I strongly suspect as a result of that it will enable the community to move forward as a community of 12.
There's a lady over there.
Yes, Meta Tsikrika, Greek TV Mega Channel. In the question of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, in the conclusions there is a reference to the Lisbon Declaration. My first question is, do you read this reference as a reaffirmation of the Lisbon Declaration? And my second question is that if and when the question of recognition comes to the United Nations, will Britain support the Greek position?
Well, as the Foreign Minister spent many hours discussing that, I think I'll let the Foreign Secretary deal with it.
There was no effort at the European Council at any level to change the Lisbon conclusions. As regards the second question, it's not actual, and no decisions, so far as I know, have been taken by any of the member states of the community who belong to the Security Council, certainly not by Britain, as to what our attitude would be in the Security Council if we encountered such a proposition. It certainly wasn't discussed in any way today, the handling of the matter at the Security Council.
Keith Rockwell.
My question is for Monsieur Delors. Excuse me for asking it in English, sir. Given the wide gap between what you had originally proposed in your Delors II package and what was finally agreed, are you not disappointed by the numbers that have been agreed on this budget proposal?
No, I have made a very rigorous calculation, and I confirm that we have obtained 85% of the means we claim for in your initial proposal.
Okay, thank you. Adam Bolton.
I wonder if in crude terms you could just tell us in pounds, shillings and pence, as it were, how much more this agreement is costing than what Britain was going for, the 1.25, and who are the main beneficiaries and by how much?
Well, the community are the main beneficiaries, and I don't think I'm going to break that down for you this evening, Adam. Without going into too many technicalities, the presidency proposal was for an own resources ceiling, I apologize for using the jargon, of 1.25 of GNP. The final outcome is 1.27 of GNP, and we have been able to reallocate resources to many of the most important areas, but the details of this will be made clear quite soon. I'm not prepared to immediately put a pound, shillings and pence price on it, no. It goes up to 1.27 in 1999. The increases are phased. There is no increase at all in 1993 or 1994. There is an increase of 0.01% of GNP in 1995, and the other increases are phased in steps until 1999. And it is in 1999 that it reaches 1.27 of GNP. That is the way in which it is phased.
Yep.
A great deal of that, I should say, a great deal of those extra resources, it was generally agreed, and I strongly support this, was on projects that will actually be devoted to infrastructural development of one sort or another in the cohesion countries and, of course, in the structural funds beyond the cohesion countries.
That's right. Yes.
Robin Crystal, TRN. Thousands of Scots marched today in Edinburgh for a Scottish Parliament. The majority of Scots voted for parties other than the Conservative Party at the election. What is in the document that you have agreed tonight for them? Why does subsidiarity have to stop at London?
Well, subsidiarity doesn't stop at London. I think you're confusing subsidiarity with devolution. If you consider the proposals that are actually coming out of the Westminster Parliament, far from subsidiarity, which means moving something from an international level to a national level, we have actually been moving decisions from a national level at the United Kingdom, firstly to the Secretary of State for Scotland, but more importantly than that, right down to individual schools, individual hospitals, and individual people. And that is the best sort of devolution, subsidiarity, call it what you will.
John Palmer of The Guardian, down here, Prime Minister, right here. You spoke earlier on about the hope now that the final British stages of ratification would follow close on the heels of the Danish referendum in April or May. Do I take it that you are more hopeful that could be completed before the end of June? And can you tell us whether the Danish agreement is justiciable in the European Court?
No, no deadline was set on ratification by the British Parliament. That is a matter for the British Parliament and members of Parliament. They are an independent breed, as you know. And we will take the bill through the House as speedily as we can, consistent with good examination. Unlike the many countries throughout the community, the British Parliament will wish to examine the bill line by line and clause by clause. They will have the opportunity to do so. It's a constitutional bill. They may take their time over it. That is understood in the Westminster Parliament, and it is understood by our colleagues across the community. We have said for many months that we will complete ratification during this session of Parliament, but I have neither been asked nor have I given a specific timetable for the ratification. We will ratify as speedily as possible. No, it isn't justiciable in the court. It's a legally binding agreement amongst the governments concerning the Danes. It is not justiciable in the European Court.
Financial Times. Prime Minister, I wonder whether you could give us your view on what the message of this summit is for the Eurosceptics at Westminster.
I think everyone will draw their own message. I have spoken of the message that I believe comes out of this summit. I think it's a message of hope and growth for economies across Europe. I think it's a message of openness for people who wish to join the community. I think it's a message that shows very clearly that despite differing national interests, the community is able to come together on important matters and give a clear-cut lead. And I think there is a further message as well. The message is that despite the internal matters that have concerned the community, we have also been able to look outward to new entrants, outward to Somalia, outward to Eastern Europe, and outward to other problems around the world in which the community is now a major force.
Fabrice Rousselot, Libération. Prime Minister, over there, over here. Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, Prime Minister. President François Mitterrand said just a few minutes ago that on Thursday night, Britain's position regarding the Danish referendum was basically that if there was to be a no, you couldn't go alone with Europe. Is that still a British position now?
Well, we are working for the Danish referendum to produce a yes. But the principle of the community has always been that the community marches along as 12. That is what all of us wish to see. That is why we have gone to so much trouble over the last few weeks and the last few days to agree a framework across the community that we believe will enable the Danes to meet their domestic concerns and successfully put a second referendum before the Danish people. But it is the joint ambition across the community for the Danes to win their referendum and for the community to advance as 12 initially and after enlargement as 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever it may be.
We have time for just two more. Gentleman there.
Prime Minister, over here, George Brock from The Times, down here. If the decision on Denmark is not justiciable in the European Court, can you tell me if there are any other courts that it is justiciable in? And if there aren't any that it's justiciable in what sense is it legally binding?
It's legally binding between governments. It's a legally binding commitment entered into between one government and another.
Yes, sir.
David Langston, Bureau of National Affairs, Washington. Sir, on the growth initiative, the figure of £24 billion that you mentioned does not equate with the 2, 6, 18 plus 5 billion ECU mentioned by Henning Christoffersen earlier today. I was wondering if you could spell out precisely the terms of difference between the Presidency Council and Henning Christopherson's meeting with the EC finance ministers, and secondly, a matter close to your own heart, what can you tell us about the environment, which was a matter raised by some of the earlier interjectors?
On the environment, I responded at the time to the environmental points that the objectors made. On the growth initiative, since I have one of the architects of the growth initiative here, I'll invite him to do it. Chancellor.
Well, in the two community policies that were particularly put forward, that is, first of all, the infrastructure facility within the European Investment Bank, that is designed to finance infrastructure projects throughout the community, trans-European networks. It will be able to lend up to 75% of the value of projects instead of the normal 50%, and that could involve extra investment of about £7 billion. The other main initiative that was put forward was a new European investment fund, which will involve the private sector being involved as well. That will guarantee loans for investment, particularly loans to small and medium-sized businesses. There, the guarantees could be around £5 billion, supporting additional projects of up to £17 billion or so.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. See you, Denmark.
That concludes this news conference held at the European Community Summit in Edinburgh. For more information, write to the EC Press Office here in Washington. The address is 2100 M Street, Northwest, 7th floor, Washington, D.C., and the zip code is 20037.